And this book is a good beginning to help you get into it, you know? So I'm a Maoist, not a Marxist-Leninist, but it's still a good book. All right, section 2, dialectical materialism, opinions about matter and consciousness, and the relationship between matter and consciousness. Number 1, matter. A, category of matter. Matter is a philosophical subject which has been examined for more than 2,500 years. Since ancient times, there has been a relentlessness struggling between materialism and idealism around this subject. Idealism asserts that the world's nature, and the first basis of all existence is consciousness, and that matter is only a product of that consciousness. Conversely, materialism asserts that nature, the entirety of the world, is composed of matter, that this material world exists indefinitely, and that all things and phenomena are composed of matter. Before dialectical materialism was born, materialist philosophers generally believed that matter was composed of some self-contained elements, that is to say, some underlying substance from which everything in the universe is ultimately derived. In ancient times, the 5 elements theory of Chinese philosophy held that those self-contained substances were metal, wood, water, fire, earth. In India, the Samakaya school believed that there were, they're going to say a different word, pradhana and prokritia. In Greece, the Milesian school believed that they were water. Valsis conception, or air, a Maximus conception. Heraclitus believed the ultimate element was fire. Democritus asserted that it was something called an atom, etc. Even as recently as the 17th and 18th century, conceptions about matter belong to modern philosophers such as Francis Bacon, René Descartes, Thomas Hobbes, Denis Diderot, etc. Still hadn't changed much. They continued following the same philosophical tendencies as ancient philosophers by focusing their studies of the material world through elemental phenomenon. All right, we're going to get to the sentence, the notes. According to Samakaya school, pradhana is the original form of matter in an unmanifested, indifferentiated state. Prokritia is manifested matter, differentiated in form, which contains potential for motion. Thales, Thales, 642 to 547 BC, Greek philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, and politician. Anaximene, Anaximene, 585 to 520 BC, Greek philosopher. Heraclitus, 540 to 480 BC, Greek philosopher, founder of ancient dialectics. Democritus, 460 to 370 BC, Greek philosopher, naturalist, and founder of atom theory. Francis Bacon, 1516 to 1626, British philosopher, novelist, mathematician, political activist. René Descartes, 1596, 1660, French philosopher, mathematician, physicist. Thomas Hobbes, 1588, 1679, British political philosopher, political activist. Denis Diderot, 1713 to 1784, French philosopher and novelist. Those are it. That was the thing. These conceptions of matter, which are developed by philosophers before Marx, time laid a foundation for the tendency of use to use nature to explain nature itself, but that tendency still had many shortcomings, such as oversimplification of matter into fictitious elements, failure to understand the nature of consciousness, as well as the relationships between matter and consciousness, failure to recognize the significance of matter in human society, leading to a failure to solve social issues based on materialist basis, etc. Here, further explanation of these shortcomings of earlier materialists, oversimplification of matter into fictitious elements. Due to the lack of understanding and knowledge of matter, metaphysical materialists created erroneous conceptions of elements which do not accurately describe the nature of matter. By using such an erroneously conceived system of non-existing elements to describe nature, metaphysical materialists were prevented from gaining real insight into the material world, which delayed and hindered scientific progress. Failure to understand the nature of consciousness, as well as the relationships between matter and consciousness. Many early materialists believed that consciousness was simply a mechanical byproduct of material processes, and that mental events, thoughts, consciousness could not affect the material world, since these events are simply mechanically determined by the material world. As the first principle, dialectical materialism does hold that consciousness is created by matter. However, dialectical materialism also holds that consciousness can influence the material world through conscious actions. This constitutes a dialectical relationship. As Lenin explains in Materialism and Imperial Criticism, quote, consciousness in general reflects being. That is a general principle of all materialism. Social consciousness reflects social being. Whereas early materialists erroneously held that consciousness is simply an accidental byproduct of matter. Dialectical materialism holds that consciousness is a characteristic of the nature of matter. As Engels wrote in the Notation of Dialectics of Nature, the matter evolves out of itself. The thinking human brain is for mechanisms of pure accident, although necessarily determined step by step. But the truth is that it is the nature of matter to advance to the evolution of thinking beings. Hence, this always necessarily occurs wherever the conditions for it, not necessarily identical at all places in time, are present. Dialectical materialism also breaks from early materialism by positing that consciousness has a dialectical relationship with matter. Consciousness arises from the material world, but can also influence the material world through conscious action. In other words, mental events can trigger physical actions which affect the material world. As Marx explains in Thesis on Feuerbach, the materialist doctrine that men are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed man are products of changed circumstances and changed upbringings, forgets that it is men who change circumstances, and that the educator must himself be educated. Hence, this doctrine is bound to divide society into two parts, one of which is superior to society, and coincidence of the change of circumstances of a human activity or self-change can be conceived and rationally understood only as revolutionary practice, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. Put more simply, as we humans are capable of revolutionary practice, which can change the world because our consciousness allows us to change circumstances. This is discussed further in Nature and Structure of Consciousness on page 79, which is a different page. Failure to recognize the significance of matter in human society leads to a failure to solve social issues based on a materialist basis. Dialectical materialism believes that matter exists in many forms and that human society is a special form of existence of matter. Lenin referred to material existence of human society as social being, which stood in contrast with human society, social consciousness. Social being encompassed all the material existence and processes of human society. Lenin wrote in Materialism and Imperial Criticism, social beings is independent of the social consciousness of men. The fact that you live and conduct your business, beget children, produce products, and exchange them gives rise to an objectively necessary chain of events, a chain of a development, which is independent of your social consciousness and is never grasped by the latter completely. The highest task of humanity is to comprehend this objective logic of economic evolution, the evolution of social life in its general and fundamental features, so that it may be possible to adapt to one's social consciousness, and that consciousness of the advanced classes of all capitalist countries in as definite, clear, and critical and a fashion of possible. Earlier materialists failed to recognize the relationship between matter and consciousness, as Lenin puts it, specifically between social being and social consciousness. Thus, in contemplating social issues, these earlier materialists were unable to find proper materialist solutions because they didn't allow that I get it now. The shortcomings result in a non-thorough materialist viewpoint. When dealing with questions about nature, the early materialists had a strong materialist viewpoint, but when dealing with social issues, they slipped into an idealist viewpoint because they didn't realize that things are like consciousness is a part of things, is connecting things. Because we're not seen outside of the world, we're seen part of the world and connected to the world. Lenin explains this concept to slipping into idealism through non-thorough materialist viewpoints in Materialism and Imperial Criticism. Once you deny objective reality, given us in sensation, you have already lost every one of your weapons against fadism. I'm gonna look up this word, everybody. Don't know what it says. Let's go on. Let's find out what this word means. Be right back, everybody. It's fideism. Here, and this is what it means. Let me get to it. A doctrine that knowledge depends on faith and revelation. It's idealism. Fideism, for you, have slipped into antagonism and subjectivism, And that is all fideism wants. Note, fideism is a form of idealism which holds the truth and knowledge are received through faith and revelations. Subjectivism is the centering of one's own self in conscious activities and perspectives. In the same work, Lenin holds that objective reality can be known through sense perception. We ask, is a man given objective reality when he sees something red or feels something hard, etc., or not? If you hold that it is not given you, inevitable sink or to subjectivism. If you hold that it is given, a philosophical concept is needed for this objective reality, and this concept has been worked out long ago. This concept is matter. Matter is a philosophical category denoting the objective reality which is given to man by his sensation, and which is occupied, photographs, and reflected by our sensation, while existing independently of them. Lenin also explains that proper materialism must recognize objective, absolute truth. To be a materialist is to acknowledge objective truth, which is revealed to us by our sense organs. To acknowledge objective truth, i.e. truth not dependent upon man and mankind, is, in one way or another, to recognize absolute truth. A failure to recognize the existence of such objective, absolute truth, according to Lenin, constitutes relativism, a position that all truth is relative and can never be absolutely objectively knowable. It is unconditionally true that to every scientific ideology, as distinct, for instance, from religious ideology, there corresponds an objective truth, absolute nature. You will say that the distinction between relative and absolute truth is from becoming, absolute truth is indefinite. And I shall reply, yes, it is sufficiently indefinite to prevent science from becoming a dogma in the bad sense of the term, from becoming something dead, frozen, ossified. But it is at the same time sufficiently definite to enable us to disassociate ourselves in the most empathetic and irrevocable manner from fideism and antagonisticism, from philosophical idealism and the sophistry of the followers of Hume and Kant. Here is a boundary which you have not noticed, and not having noticed it, you have fallen into the swamp of reactionary philosophy. It is the boundary between dialectical materialism and relativism. In other words, while proper materialism must contain a degree of relativistic thinking sufficient to challenge assumptions and re-examine perceived truth periodically, materialists must not fall into complete relativism, such as the espoused by Hume and Kant, lest they fall into idealist positions. Ultimately, absolute truth, according to Lenin, constitutes the alignment of consciousness, understanding, with objective reality, not to be confused with Hegel's notion of absolute truth. Lenin recognized the development of Marx and Engels as modern materialism, which is immeasurably richer than the content of and incomparably more consistent than all preceding forms of materialism, in large part because Marx and Engels were able to apply materialism properly to social sciences by taking the direct materialist road as against idealism. He goes on to describe would-be materialists would fall to idealist positions due to revivalism and other philosophical inadequacies as, quote, a contemptible middle party in philosophy who confuse the materialist and idealist trend on every question. Lenin warned that a failure to hold a thoroughly materialist viewpoint leads philosophers to becoming ensnared in idealism, that is, in the diluted and subtle fedism. They become ensnared from the moment they took sensation, not as an image to the external world, but as a special element. It is nobody's sensations, nobody's mind, nobody's spirit, nobody's will. This is what one inevitably comes to if one does not recognize the materialist theory that the human mind reflects the objectively real external world. External. In other words, idealist conceptions of sensation injects mysticism into philosophy by conceiving of sensation as otherworldly, supernatural, and detached from material human beings with material experiences in the material world. The development of natural sciences in the late 19th century and early 20th century, especially the invention of the Roentgen, Barquerol, Thomson, etc., disapproved that theories of classical elements such as fire, water, earth, etc. These innovations led to the viewpoint crisis in the field of physical science. Many idealists used this opportunity to affirm the non-material nature of the world, ascribing the roles of supernatural forces to the birth of the world. Lenin discussed this viewpoint crisis extensively in Materialism and in Imperial Criticism. Here, Lenin discussed relativist reactions to new breakthroughs of natural science, which led even scientists who proclaimed to be materialists to take idealist positions. And here's what Lenin said. And I'm going to say a French word, so I know ponquer. Okay. We are faced, says Prochere, a French scientist, with the ruins of the old principles of physics, a general debacle of principles. It is true, he remarks, that all the mentioned departures from principles refers to infinitesimal magnitudes. It is possible that we are still arrogant of other infinitesimals counteracting the undermining the old principles. But at any rate, we have reached a, quote, period of doubt. We have already seen the epistemological deductions the author draws from this period of doubt. It is not nature which imposes on or dictates to us the concept of space and time, but we who impose them on nature. Whatever is not thought is pure nothing. These deductions are idealist deductions. The breakthrough of the most fundamental principles show, such as Poincaré's trend of thought, that these principles are not copies, photographs of nature, not images of something external in relations to man's consciousness, but products of his consciousness. Poincaré does not develop this deduction consistently, nor is he essentially interested in the philosophical aspects of the question. And here it says Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen, 1845 to 1923, German physicist. Henri Barquerol, French physicist, and Sir Joseph John Thomson, 1856 to 1940, British physicist, professor of London Royal Institute. All right, just going to look back just a little bit. No ableism is allowed here. Okay. All right, cool. Let's go on. Lenin concludes by standing on the non-thorough materialist position has led directly to these idealist positions of relativism. The essence of the crisis in modern physics consists in the breakdown of the old laws and basic principles, in the rejection of an objective reality existing outside the mind. This is in the replacement of materialism by idealism and antagonisticism. Antagonisticism. With the historical background, in order to fight against the distortions of many idealists and to protect the development of the materialist viewpoint, Vladimir Lenin simultaneously summarized all the natural scientific achievements in the late 19th century and early 20th century and built upon Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' thought to develop this definition of matter. Matter is a philosophical category denoting objective reality which is given to man in his sensation and which is copied, photographed, and reflected by our sensations while existing independently of them. Lenin's definition of matter shows that, first, we need to distinguish between the definition of matter as a philosophical category, the category that summarizes the most basic and common attributes of all material existence, and which is defined with the objective of solving the basic issues of philosophy, from the definition of matter that was used in specialized science, specific and sense detectable substance. Second, the most basic common attribute of all kinds of matter, and under both definitions listed in the previous paragraph, is objective existence, meaning matter exists outside of human consciousness, dependently of human consciousness, no matter whether humans can perceive it with our senses or not. Third, matter with its specific forms can cause and affect mental events in humans when it directly or indirectly impacts the human senses. Human consciousness is the reflection of matter. Matter is the thing that is reflected by human consciousness. Lenin's definition of matter played an important role in the development of materialism and scientific consciousness. First, by pointing out that the most basic common attribute of matter is objective existence. Lenin successfully distinguished the basic differences between the definition of matter as a philosophical category and the definition of matter as a category of specialized science. It helped solve the problems of defining matter in the previous forms of materialism. It offered scientific evidence to define what can be considered matter. It laid out the theoretical foundation of building a materialist viewpoint of history and overcame the shortcomings of idealist conceptions of society. Second, by asserting that matter was objective reality, quote unquote, or quote unquote, given to a man in his sensations and, quote, copied, photographed, and reflected by our sensation, end quote. Lenin not only confirmed the primary existence of matter and the secondary existence of consciousness, but he also affirmed that humans had the ability to be aware of objective reality through the copying, photographing, and reflection of our sensations. In other words, sense perception. According to dialectical materialism viewpoint, motion is the mode of existence of matter. Space and time are the forms of existence of matter. Mode refers to the way or manner in which something occurs or exists. Can you think of a mode as pertaining to the how as opposed to the what. For example, mode is circulation, refers to how commodities circulate within society. Mode of production refers to how commodities are produced in society. So mode of existence of matter refers to how matter exists in our universe. Form comes from the category pair of content and form. Form refers to how we perceive objects, phenomena, and ideas. So form is existence of matter refers to the way in which we perceive the existence of matter in our universe. Motion is mode of existence of matter. And Frederick Engels explains, motion in the most general sense conceived as the mode of existence, the inherited attribute of matter, comprehends all changes and processes occurring in the universe, from mere change of place right up to thinking. According to Engels, motion encompasses more than just positional changes. Motion embodies all the changes and processes happening in this universe. Matter is always associated with motion, and matter can only express its existence through motion. In dialectical materialist philosophy, motion is also known as change, and it refers to the changes which occur as a result of the mutual impacts which occur in let me reread this. In dialectical materialist philosophy, motion is also known as change, and it refers to the changes which occur as a result of the mutual impact which occur in between subjects through the negotiation of contradictions. Motion is a constant attribute of all things, phenomenon, and ideas. Because matter is inseparable from motion and vice versa, Engels defines motion as a mode of matter, the way or manner in which matter exists. It is impossible for matter in our universe to exist in completely static and unchanged state, isolated from the rest of existence. Thus, matter exists in the mode of motion. Over time, motion leads to development. As things, phenomena, and ideas transition through various stages of quality change, matter exists objectively. Therefore, motion also exists objectively. The motion of matter is self-motion. It is important to note that matter, in the philosophical sense, is used in dialectical materialist philosophy, including all that is objective, external to individual human consciousness. This includes objective phenomena which human senses are able to detect, such as objective social relations, objective economic values, etc. Objectiveness is discussed more in annotation 08. Page 112. Objective social relations are discussed in annotation 10. Okay, that was above. All right, number one, this is a note. In the original Vietnamese word, okay, it's just going over the words. Okay, never mind. All right. In Dialectics of Nature, Frederick Engels discussed the properties of motion and explains that motion can neither be created nor destroyed. Therefore, motion can only change form or transfer from one object to another. In this sense, all objects are dynamically linked together through motion. The whole of nature, accessible to us, forms a system, an interconnected totality of bodies. And by bodies, we understand all material exists, extending from stars to atoms. In the fact that these bodies are interconnected is already included that they react one on one another, and it is precisely these mutual reactions that constitute motion. It already becomes evident here that matter is unthinkable without motion. And if, in addition, matter confronts us as something given equally uncreatable as indestructible, it follows that motion also is uncreatable and indestructible. It became impossible to reject this conclusion as soon as it was recognized that the universe is a system, an interconnection of bodies. In other words, every body of matter is in motion relative to other bodies of matter, and thus matter is inseparable from motion. Motion results from the interaction of bodies of matter, because motion and matter define each other, and because define each other, and because motion can only exist in relation to matter, and matter can only exist in relation to motion, the motion of matter can be described as self-motion, quote unquote, because the motion is not created externally, but exists only within and in relation to matter itself. Engels further explains that if this were not true, if motion was external to matter, then motion itself would have had to have been created externally to matter, which is impossible. To say that matter, during the whole unlimited time of its existence, has only once and for what is an infinitesimally short period of comparison to its eternity, found itself able to differentiate its motion and thereby to unfold the whole wealth of this motion, and that before and after this remains restricted for eternity to mere change of place. This is equivalent to maintaining that matter is mortal and motion transitory. The indestructibility of motion cannot be merely quantitative. It must also be conceived qualitatively. Matter whose purely mechanical change of place includes indeed the possibility under favorable conditions of being transformed into heat, electricity, chemical actions, or life, but which is not capable of producing these conditions from out of itself. Such matter is forfeited motion which has lost the capacity of being transformed into a various forms appropriate to it, may indeed still have dynamis, but no longer, energia, and so has become partially destroyed. Both, however, are unthinkable. So motion can change forms, can transfer from one material body to another, but it can never be created externally from matter. Neither motion nor matter can create or destroy in our universe. Thus, matter exists in the state of self-motion. Motion can never externally be created nor externally applied to matter. To put it another way, motion results from the fact that all things, phenomena, and ideas exist as assemblages of relationships. And these relationships contain opposing forces, as Lenin explains in his philosophical notebooks. The conditions for the acknowledge of all processes of the world in their self-movement, in their spontaneous development, in their real life is the knowledge of them as a unity of opposites. Developed is the struggle of opposites. Based on a scientific achievement which occurred in his lifetime, Engels classified motion into 5 basic forms. Mechanical motion, changes in position of objects in space. Physical motion, movement of molecules, electrons, fundamental particles, thermal processes, electricity. Chemical motion, changes of organic and inorganic substances in combination and separation processes. Biological motion, changes of living objects or genetic structures. Social motions, changing in economy, politics, culture, and social life. These basic forms of motion are arranged into levels of advancements based on levels of complexity of matter that is affected. Do you want to go? All right, you got it. Good job. Let me get you up. All right. So Engel's forms of motion and in relations to matter. You have basic forms, material effects. So we're going from less advanced to advanced motion, more advanced. So we got mechanical, which is changes in the position of objects in space. You got physical, which is the movements of molecules, electrons, fundamental particles, thermal processes, electricity, etc. Chemical motions, changes of organic and inorganic substances, of combinations and separation processes, etc. Biological motion, changes of living subjects and genetic structures, etc. Social motions, changes of economy, political and cultural, social. So what they're saying here is that they're going to the unities of opposite, that some external forces collides with the internal forces, causing a reaction. So less complex of matter, more complex. This basic forms of motion. Are you good? We're good. I don't know if I explained that really well anyways. You've been waiting to read this book? Nice. All right. The basic forms of motion, each in effect different forms of matter. But these forms of motion do not exist independently from each other. They actually have strong relationships with each other, in which the more advanced forms of motion developed from lower forms of motion, and more advanced forms of motion also eternally include lower forms of motion, i.e. biological motion contains chemical motions contain physical motions, etc. Every object exists with many forms of motion, but any given object is defined by its most advanced form of motion, i.e. living creatures are defined in terms of biological motion, societies are defined in terms of social motion. By classifying the basic forms of motion, Engels laid out the foundation of classification and synthesization of science. The basic forms of motion differ from one another, but they are also unified with each other into one continuous system of motion. Understanding this dialectical relationships between different forms of motion help to overcome misunderstanding and confusion about motion. In Dialectics of Nature, Engels clears up a great deal of confusion and addresses many misconceptions about matter, motion, forces, energy, etc., which exist in both science and philosophy at the time by defining and explaining the dialectical nature of matter and motion. When dialectical materialism affirmed that motion was the mode of existence, the natural attribute of matter, is also confirmed that motion is absolute and eternal. This does not mean that dialectical materialism denies that things can become frozen. However, according to dialectical materialism viewpoint, freezing is a special form of motion. It is motion of an equilibrium, and freezing is relative and temporary. Motion in equilibrium is motion that has not changed the position, form, and or structure of things. Freezing is a relative phenomenon because freezing only occurs in some forms of motion and in some specific relation. It does not occur in all forms of motion, in all kinds of relations. Freezing is a temporary phenomenon because freezing only exists for a limited period of time. It cannot last forever. Equilibrium can exist at any advancement of motion. Lenin discusses equilibrium as it pertains to the social forms of motion and discussing an equilibrium of forces existing in Russia in 1905 in this article of Equilibrium and Forces. Hold on a second. What are you doing, Rufus? Okay, here we go. All right. I'm going to reread this. Sorry, I forgot where it's at. Let me get a drink though, real quick. Everybody okay? Are we okay now? Going through different forms of motions. All right. I'm going to reread this. Equilibrium can exist at any advancement of motion. Lenin discussed equilibrium as it pertains to the social forms of motion. In discussing an equilibrium of forces existing in Russia in 1905, in this article, an equilibrium of forces. 1. The result to date, Monday, October 30th, is an equilibrium of forces as well as we already pointed out in proletary number 23. Number 2, Tsarism is no longer strong enough, the revolution not yet strong enough to win. 3, hence the tremendous amount of vacillation, the terrific and erroneous increase of revolutionary happenings, strikes, meetings, barricades, committees of public safety, complete paralyze of the government, etc. On the other hand, the absence of resolute repressive measures, the troops are wavering. Number 4, the Tsar's court is wavering. The times of the Daily Telegraph between dictatorship and a constitution. The court is wavering and biding its time. Strictly speaking, these are its correct tactics. The equilibrium of force compels it to bide its time. For power is in its hands. The revolution has reached a stage at which it is disadvantageous for the counter-revolution to attack, to assume an offensive. So those are examples of equilibrium. For us, for the proletariat, for the consistent revolutionary Democrats. No, wait, is that right? Did I have that word right?
Annotation 64 continued. For us, for the proletariat, for consistent revolution.
All right, cool. Okay, go right. For us, for the proletariat, for consistent revolutionary Democrats, this is not enough. If we do not raise to the higher level, if we do not manage to launch an independent offensive, if we do not smash the forces of Tsarism, do not destroy its actual power, then the revolution will stop halfway when the bourgeoisie will fool the workers. 5. Rumors has it that the Constitution has been decided upon. If that is so, then it follows that the Tsar is heeding the lessons of 1848 and other revolutions. He wants to grant a constitution without a constituent assembly, before a constituent assembly apart from the constituent assembly. What kind of constitution? At best, for the Tsar, a constitutional democratic constitution. This applies achievement of the constitutional Democrats' ideal, skipping the revolution, deceiving the people, For all the same, there will be no complete and actual freedom of elections. Should not the revolution skip this granted constitution? Space, time are forms of existence of matter. All right, here we go. Every form of matter exists in a specific position with specific space particularity, height, width, length, etc., in specific relations, in front or behind, above or under, to the left or right, etc., with other forms of matter. These potential relations exist in what we call space. Space is defined by positional relations of matter. And on the other hand, the existence of matter is also expressed in the speed of change and the order in which change occurs. These changes occur in what we call time. As Engels wrote, for the basic forms of all existence are space and time, and a being outside of time is as absurd as an existence outside of space. Matter, space, and time are not separable. There is no matter that exists outside of space and time. There is also no space and time that exists outside of matter's motion. Space and time as the form of matter, i.e., the ways in which we perceive the existence of matter. We are only able to perceive and understand material objects as they exist within space and time. Space and time as forms of existence of matter exists objectively and are defined by matter. Space is defined by the positional relationships between material objects. Time is defined by the speed of change of material objects and the other in which these change occurs. Space has three dimensions: height, width, length. Time has one direction, from the past to the future. C, the material unity of the world. Dialectical materialism affirms that the nature of the world is matter, and the world is unified in its material properties. Unified, I was right. Unified, yeah, in its material properties. In other words, the entire universe in all its diversity is made of matter, and the properties of matter are the same throughout the known universe. First, there is only one world, the material world. The material world is the first existence, i.e., it existed before consciousness. It existed objectively and independently of human consciousness. Second, the material world exists externally, endlessly, infinitely. It has no known beginning point, and there is no evidence that it will ever disappear. Third, all known objects and phenomena of the material world have objective relations with each other, and all objects and phenomena exist in unity with each other. All of these are specific forms of structures of matter, or have material origins which has born from matter, and all are governed by objective rules of the material world. In the material world, there is nothing that exists outside of the changing and transforming processes of matter. All of these processes exist as cause and effect of each other. The most important thing to understand here is that every object and phenomenon in the universe arises as matter. All material objects and phenomena are dynamically linked to one another in an infinite chain of causes and effect, and changes and transformations, all governed by the material law of our reality. This understanding is the material foundation of dialectical materialism. 2, consciousness. How's everybody doing? Quick on check-in. How's everybody doing? Everybody okay? Don't know why there's someone in the thing. 2, consciousness. A source of consciousness. According to the materialist viewpoint, consciousness has natural and social sources. Consciousness arises from nature and from social activities and relations. You're welcome. Natural refers to the material world. Without the material world of matter, material processes, and the evolution of material systems up to and including the human brain, consciousness could never have formed. Social activities and relations also contribute to the development of consciousness. The social process of labor and language were also prerequisites of the development of conscious activity in human beings. Thank you, by the way, I appreciate that. Natural sources of consciousness. There are many factors that form the natural sources of consciousness, but the two most basic factors are human brains and the relationship between humans and the objective world, which makes possible creative and dynamic reflections. About human brains, consciousness is an attribute of a highly organized form of matter, which is the brain. Consciousness is the function and the result of neurophysio, I think that's right. Logical activities of human brains. Sweet. As human brains evolve the development over time, their neurophysiological activities become richer, and as these activities progress, consciousness develops further and further over time. This explains why the human evolution process is also a process of developing the capacity for perception and thinking. Whenever humans' neurophysiological activities don't function normally because of damaged brains, or mental life is also disturbed. Oh, you have another picture. Ready for the picture, Joe? Are you there, Joe? Joe! There we go. There you are. All right, here's the next picture, everybody. About the relationships between humans and the objective world, which made possible creative and dynamic reflection. The relationship between humans and the objective world has been essential for as long as humans had existed. In this relationship, the objective world is reflected through human senses, which interact with human brains and then form a consciousness. And there you go. Material world equals human senses equals human brains equals consciousness. There you go. Thank you. Good. Sorry. I'm reading this book right here. It's Ho Chi Minh Thought, but they're talking about they've been getting off of Lenin's materialism and empiricism criticism, and also dialectics of natures from Engels too. So they've been on that so far. Those two things. Consciousness exists as a dynamic set of relationships between the external material world, human sense perception, and the functions of the human brain. Reflection is the recreation of the features of one form of matter in a different form of matter, which occurs when they mutually impact each other through interaction. Reflection is a characteristic of all forms of matter. There are many forms and levels of reflection, such as from more simple to more complex. Physical and chemical reflection, biological reflection, mental reflection, and creativity and dynamic reflection, etc. Change is driven by mutual impacts between or within things, phenomena, and or ideas. Anytime two such subjects impact one another, trace some form or another are left on both interacting subjects. Kind of like when feudalism emerged and negated out, and capitalism negated out of that. We still have some essence of feudalism still pertinent. And I think that's what they're saying here. This characteristic of change is called reflection. The concept of reflection, first proposed by Marx, Engels, and Lenin, has been advanced through the works of various Soviet psychologists, philosophers, and scientists, including Ivan Pavlov, Todor Pavlov, Alenskia, Lonotev, Lev Voyosky, Valentin Voleshevo, and others, and is used as the basis of scientific inquiry up to this day by mainstream researchers in Cuba, Vietnam, China, and Laos. The information provided below is somewhat simplified and generalized to give the reader a basic familiarity with the theory of reflection and the development of reflection in nature. Dialectical materialist scientists have developed a theory of development of evolution of forms of reflection, positing that forms of reflection have become increasingly complex as organic processes and life have evolved and grown more complex over time. Here we go, we got another picture. We all like the pictures, don't we? All right, the chart below gives an idea of how different forms and relations of reaction have evolved over time. Development of forms of reflection, human society. How should we read this, you think, Joe? From top to bottom? I'll read it from top to bottom. I'll do it. Reflections of form, human society, human beings. Sentient organisms, simplest organisms, organic matter. What's this is? I said it. How you say that word? Matter. The I word. Inorganic.
Organic.
Organic. There we go. Matter. Sorry. All right. So, dynamic and creative reflection, consciousness, mental reflection, conditions reflexes, biological reflections, induction, excitation, unconditioned, reflexive, physical, and chemical. This chart outlines the basic development tendencies of forms of reflection in matter, which leads from inorganic matter to life, to human consciousness in society. Okay, cool. So it's from the bottom to the okay. So the bottom part is the less complex, all the way to the top is the more complex. That's what I'm getting from there. All right. Obviously not all, okay, you got it. Yeah. This chart outlines the basic development tendencies of form of reflection in matter, which leads from inorganic matter to life, to human consciousness in society. I already read this, didn't I? Obviously, I'm going to read this again. Obviously, not all subject develop completely along the path outlined above. Thus far, to our knowledge, only human beings have developed entirely to the level of consciousness of society. It is also known whether or how human society may develop into some future as yet unknown form. Physical and chemical reflection is the simplest form of reflection, dealing with the ways in which inorganic matter is reflected in human consciousness. Physical and chemical reflection is the reflection of mechanical, physical, and chemical changes and reaction of inorganic material, i.e. changes in structures, positions, physical chemical properties, and the processes of combining and dissolving substances. Physical and chemical reaction are passive. When two objects interact with each other, physically or chemically, they do not do so consciously. Another picture. Thank you, Joe, by the way. All right, so we're going to read from the top. Reflection occurs anytime two material objects interact and the features of the object are transferred to each other. Below are some very simplified illustrations to relate the basic ideas of the physical reflections of material objects. The first one is physical reflection change in position. All right, let's read it. Reflection as changed in position. 1. Round object moves towards square object. 2. Round object impacts square object. So like what they're doing, okay, perfect. 3. Square object changes position, round object bounces and in the reverse direction. So basically, if you put your hands together, you put them separately, two hands come together and bounce off each other. And that's what they're saying in that one, right? 4. Thus, square objects change in position, reflects the motion of round objects, and vice versa. Tracing of both contradicting objects are reflected in the respective motion and position of each object. Now let's go ahead. Physical reflection. Here we go. Physical reflection, change in structure. 1. Round object moves towards square object. 2. Round object impacts square object. 3. Structural change traces occur in both round and square objects is a result of impact. These changes constitute structural physical reflection. Now these are simplified, but this is good. This is good. This is good. These are simplified, but still good. This is where it's a little bit difficult. Chemical reflection, single replacement. 1. Atom C is attached to atom B. 2. Atom C detaches from atom B and transfers to attached to atom A. You see the transfer. Both molecules mutually reflect one another. After a process of chemical reaction, one molecule loses atom C while the other gains atom C. Make sense? We looking good there so far? Everybody looking good there? So we went over this. We went over chemical reflection, which you saw the third one. We went over to the change in structures, which shows the change in structures as the end results. And we went to reflection, which bounces off. There we go. Good job. As dialectical materialism, we must strive to develop our understanding of the reflection of physical and chemical changes and reactions so that our conception reflect the material world as accurately as possible. For example, we must not ascribe consciousness to physical processes. Example, a gambler who comes to believe that a pair of dice is spiteful or cursed is attributing conscious motivation to unconscious physical processes, which is an inaccurate ideological reflection of reality, because the dice don't have anything besides hitting each other. They do not have any mind, nowhere to say, you know what, yeah, I got it. Biological reflection. How we doing? We got 20 minutes. Biological reflection is a higher and more complex form of reflection compared to physical reflection. It deals with reflection of organic material in the natural world, or our observation of biological processes, have become more sophisticated and complex through developments in natural science, the development of better tools for observation, such as microscopes and other technologies, and so on. Our conscious reflection of the natural world have also become more complex. Biological reflection is an expression through what is that word? Ecstasy. What's that word? Exaxation?
I'm highlighting stuff, so I wasn't sure exactly where you were at.
Biological reflection is the oppression, is oppressed through, I gotta look up this word. I'm gonna look up this word real quick. You communists are smelly. Yeah, I am. I'm a smelly person. Now, he just called me smelly. Not a big deal, doodly. They're just calling me smelly. He's calling me smelly. It's excitation. Excitation. So let's find out. I'm gonna show you what it means. Oh, that's not it. Oh, what the hell? I didn't. I didn't take a picture of it. My bad, everybody. Let's do this again. No, not wrong one. Why is it not showing it? I just took a picture of it. What the hell? All right, let's try again. Maybe it'll show up this time, huh? Wish me luck. Still won't show up. Why won't it show up?
I don't know, but what is excitation?
I'm trying to get that definition. I just can't get it. It won't show up. It won't let me do the thing. I took a screenshot and everything. So I'm trying to get it. No, that's not it either. Oh my God. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, come on now. It won't let me do it. It won't take my screenshot. Oh, sweet. There it is. Meaning energized or excited. Okay, cool. Thank you. There you go. You got it. Thank you. I am not good at memorizing definitions and stuff. Effect. All right. Should be good. All right, cool. All right, induction and reflexive. It's gonna do that. Excitation is the reaction of a simple plant and animal life form which occurs when they change position or structures as a direct result of physical change in their habits, i.e., a plant which moves towards the sun throughout the day. Induction is the reaction of animals with simple nerve systems which can sense or feel their environment. Induction occurs through unconditioned reflex mechanisms. Unconditioned reflexes are characterized by a permanent connection between sensory perception and reaction. Such reaction are not learned, but simply occur automatically based on the psychological mechanisms occurring within the organism. An example of an unconditioned reflexive response would be muscles in the leg twitching at the response of a tap or a knee of the knee. Such response are purely psychological and are never learned conditions into us.
Theological.
Oh wait,
psychological would mean learned. Physiological.
Physiological and are never learned conditions into us. These reactions are simply induced physiologically, not psychologically. Mental reflection are reactions which occur in animals with central nervous systems. Mental reflection occurs through conditioned reflex mechanisms. Conditioned reflexes are reactions which are learned by organisms. These responses are acquired as animals learn to associate previously unrelated neural stimuli to elicit a particular reaction. The Russian psychologist, right? Yeah, psychologist Ivan Pavlov famously developed our understanding of conditioned responses by ringing a doorbell shortly before giving dogs food. What?
Dinner bell.
Thank you. After a few repetitions, dogs would be given a salivate or began to salivate upon hearing the dinner bell being rung, even before any food was offered. Any dog which did not receive this conditioning would not salivate upon hearing the dinner bell. This is what makes it a learned conditioned response, a type of mental reflection. Dynamic and creative reflection is the most advanced form of reflection. It only occurs in matter that has the highest structural level, such as the human brain. Dynamic and creative reflection is done through the human brain's nervous physiological activities. Whenever the objective world impacts human senses, this is a kind of reflection that actively selects the processes information to create new information and to understand the meaning of that information. This dynamic and creative reflection is called consciousness. Remember, Lenin's definition of matter from materialism and imperial criticism. Matter is a philosophical category denoting objective reality which is given to man in his sensations and which is copied, photographed, and reflected by our sensations while existing independently of them. An intrinsic, what time is it? Let me see what we're doing. Let me see where I can find a stopping point. So it looks like 96. Where was I at?
93.
Yeah, 3 more pages.
Okay, then we have notes.
Yep. Any intrinsic property of matter is that it can be sensed by human beings, and through this sensation, reflected in human consciousness. Thus, all forms of matter share the characteristics of being able to be reflected in the human mind. Criticizing Karl Pearson, who said that it was not logical to maintain that all matter had the property of being conscious. Lenin wrote in brackets, but it is logical to suppose that all matter possesses a property which is essentially kindred to sensation, the property of reflect. Understanding the concept of dynamic and creative reflection is critical to understanding the roles of consciousness and the ideal of dialectical materialism. In particular, reflection differentiates dialectical materialism from the idealist form of dialectics used by Hegel. As Marx famously wrote in Capital One, "My dialectic method is not only different from the Hegelian, but it is direct opposite to Hegel. The life possessed of human brains, i.e. the process of thinking, which under the name of the idea, he even transforms it into an independent subject, is the demeragos, craftsmen, artisans, creators of the real world, and the real world is only the external phenomenon forms of idea. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. In other words, Hegel's idealism saw human consciousness as defining the material world. Dialectical materialism inverts this relationship to recognize that what we conceive in our mind is only a reflection of the material world. As Marx explained in The German Ideology, all consciousness thought stems from life processes through reflection. Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious existence, and the existence of men is their actual life process. If in all ideology, men and their circumstances appear upside down, as in a camera obscura, this phenomenon arises just as much from their historical life process as the inversion of objects in the retina does from their physical life process. Marx and Engels argued that consciousness arose from life processes of human beings. Life processes are processes of motion and change which occurs within organisms to sustain life. And these processes have a dialectical relationship with consciousness. The process of life, therefore, reflects consciousness, just as consciousness reflects human life processes. Conscious activity, such as being able to hunt, gather, and cook food, build shelter, and so on, improve the life processes of human beings. By improving our health, extending our lifespans, etc. And as our life processes improve, our consciousness was able to develop more fully. As the concrete example of dialectics between life processes and consciousness, it is now widely believed by scientists that the advent of cooking and preparing food, conscious activity, improved the functions of the human brain, a life process which in turn developed human consciousness, and so on. Life processes thus determine how consciousness reflects reality, while consciousness impacts back on life processes, reflecting the dialectical relationships between matter and consciousness, and between practical activities and conscious. Because consciousness arose from life processes of human beings in the material world, we know that material world is reflected in our consciousness. However, this reflection do not determine the material world and do not mirror the material world exactly. It is also important to understand that since life processes in the material world predate the determined consciousness, consciousness can never be a first basis of seeking truth about the world. As Marx further explained in The German Ideology, since the young Hegelians consider conceptions, thoughts, ideas, in fact all the products of consciousness to which they attribute an independent existence as the real chains of men, just as the old Hegelians declared them the true bonds of human society, it is evident that the young Hegelians have to fight only against this illusion of consciousness, since according to their fantasies, the relationship of men, all their doings, their chains, and their limitations are products of their consciousness. The young Hegelians logically put to men the moral postulate of exchanging their present consciousness for human, critical, and egotistic consciousness, and thus of removing their limitations. This demand to change consciousness amounts to the demand to interpret reality in another way, i.e. to recognize it by means of another interpretation. In other words, Hegelian idealism makes the critical mistake of believing that ideal consciousness is the first basis of reality, and that anything and everything can be achieved through mere conscious activity. Marx, on the other hand, argues that life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. and that we must understand the way in which reality is reflected in consciousness before we can hope to affect change in the material conditions of human beings. In direct contrast to the German philosophy, which descends from heaven to earth, where here in the materialist perspective, we ascend from earth to heaven. That is to say, we do not set out from what men say, image conceived, nor from men as narrated, thoughts of imagined, conceived in order to arrive at men in the flesh. We set out from real active men, and on the basis of real life process, we demonstrate the development of ideological reflexes and echoes of this life process. The phantoms formed in the human brain are also necessarily, what's that word? Sublimates of their material life process, which empirically invariable of and bound to material premises.
It's verifiable.
Thank you. Of material premises, mortality, religion, metaphysics, all the rest of ideology and their corresponding forms of consciousness thus no longer retain a semblance of independence. They have no history, no development, but men developing their material production and their material intercourse alter along with their real existence, their thinking, and their products of their thinking. Life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. In the first method of approach, the starting point is consciousness taken as the living individual. In the second method, which conforms to real life, it is the real living individual themselves, and consciousness is considered solely as their consciousness. So, the work of dialectical materialism is not to try to develop utopian conceptions of reality first, to then proceed to try to force such purely ideal conceptions into reality. Rather, we must understand the material basis of reality, as well as the material processes of change and motions which govern reality. And only then can we search for ways to which human beings can influence material reality through conscious activity. As Marx explains, the revolutionary must not be fooled into believing he can simply conceive of an ideal world and then replicate it into reality through interpretations and conscious thought alone. Instead, he must start with a firm understanding of material conditions and from the material basis, determine how to build our revolutionary movement through conscious impact in material relations and processes of development in the material world. Marx wrote in German Ideology, communism is for us not a state of affairs which is to be established, an ideal to which reality will have to adjust itself. We call communism the real movement which abolishes the present state of things. The condition of this movement results from the premise now in existence. This distinction may seem subtle at first, but it has massive implications for how Marx suggests we go about participating in revolutionary activities. For Marx, purely idealist debates and criticisms are an unproductive waste of time. The young Hegelian ideologists, in spite of their allegedly world-shattering statements, are the staunchest conservatives. The most recent of them have found the correct expression for their activity. When they declare they are only fighting against phrases. They forget, however, that to these phrases, they themselves are only opposing other phrases, and that they are in no way combating the real existing world when they are merely combating the phrase of this world. The only result, which is philosophic criticism, could achieve were a few, and at that thoroughly one-sided elucidation of Christianity from the point of view of religious history, all the rest of their assertions are only further embellishments of their claim to have furnished in these unimportant elucidations discoveries of universal importance. Marx also discussed the uselessness of idealist conjecture. We're almost finished, everybody. One more page. Moreover, it is quite immaterial that consciousness starts to do on its own. Out of all such muck, we get only the one inference that these three moments, the forces of production, the state of society, the consciousness, can and must come into contradiction with one another, because the division of labor applies the possibility, nay, the fact, that intellectuals and material activity, employment and labor, production and consumption devolve on different individuals, and that the only possibility to their not coming into contradiction lies in the negation in its turn of the division of labor. It is self-evident, moreover, that the specters, bonds, and higher beings concept, scruples, terms of idealist conceptions are merely the idealistic spiritual expressions of conceptions apparently of the isolated individual, the image of very empirical fetters and limitations within which the mode of production of life and the form of intercourse coupled with it move. What Marx means by this is that we should focus on the material processes and conditions of society if we intend to change society, because idealist speculation, conjecture, critique, and thought alone at the individual level will never be capable of effecting revolutionary change in our material world. Instead, we must focus on the material basis of reality, the material conditions of society, and seek revolutionary measures which are built upon materialist foundations. Only by understanding material processes of development, as well as the dialectical relationships between consciousness and matter, can we reliably and effectively begin to impact reality through conscious activity. This begins with the recognition that consciousness, thought itself, is reflection of material reality, which develops the result from life processes of material emotion and processes of change within the human brain. This concept of reflection, pioneered by Marx and Engels, was significantly developed by Vladimir Lenin in his response to Mechanian positivists who posited that what we perceive is not truly reality. In his philosophical notebooks, Lenin wrote, "Life gives rise to the brain. Nature is reflected in the human brain." The materialism and imperial criticism, Lenin further defined the relationship between matter and consciousness through reflection. And then tomorrow we'll go over Lenin's proof of the theory of reflection. Let me get a bookmark. Let me do my bookmark. All right, we ended on 96. 96. Okay, is anybody else before you go, Joe? See if anybody else wants to come up, ask some questions too after you go through the notes. Does anybody else want to come up? Who wants to come up next?
Everybody is welcome.
Anybody's welcome. All right, let's give it like 30 seconds. All right. Doesn't look like anybody's coming up. All right, Joe. Should we go with Joe first and Doodley next?
It's up to Doodley. Doodley, do you want to keep doing it that way, or do you want to go first today?
You can go first.
Okay. So we start with materialist dialectical methodology explains the world in terms of relationships and development was the last thing we had gone over. And then we started going into dialectical materialist opinions about matter, consciousness, and the relationship between matter and consciousness. Matter is a philosophical subject which has been examined for more than 2,500 years. Since ancient times, there has been a relentless struggle between materialism and idealism around this subject. Idealism asserts that the world's nature, the first basis of all existence, is consciousness, and that matter is only a product of that consciousness. Conversely, materialism asserts that nature, the entirety of the world, is composed of matter, and that this material world exists indefinitely, and that all things and phenomena are composed of matter. And then, before dialectical materialism was born, materialist philosophers generally believed that matter was composed of some small contained element or elements, that is to say, some underlying substance from which everything in the universe is ultimately derived. These conceptions of matter, which were developed by philosophers before Marx's time, laid a foundation for a tendency to use nature to explain nature itself. But that tendency still has many shortcomings, such as oversimplification of matter into fictitious elements, failure to understand the nature of consciousness as well as the relationships between matter and consciousness, failure to recognize the significance of matter in human society, leading to a failure to solve social issues based on the materialist basis. And so then we went over shortcomings of early materialists. We went over the oversimplification of matter into fictitious elements, failure to understand the nature of consciousness as well as the relationship between matter and consciousness. And then, as a first principle, dialectical materialism does hold that consciousness is created by matter. However, dialectical materialism also holds that consciousness can influence the material world through conscious action. This constitutes a dialectical relationship. And then Lenin said, consciousness in general reflects being. That is the general principle of all materialism. Social consciousness reflects social being. And then Marx said, somehow I forgot to highlight Marx. Marx said, the materialist doctrine that men are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed men are products of changed circumstances. Can you mute? And changed upbringing. Forgets that it is men who change circumstances and that the educator must himself be educated. Put more simply, we as humans are capable of revolutionary practice which can change the world because our consciousness allows us to change circumstances. Failure to recognize the significance of matter in human society, leading to a failure to solve social issues based on a materialist basis. That's part of it being discussed further. Dialectical materialists believe that matter exists in many forms and that human society is a special form of existence of matter. And then these shortcomings resulted in a non-thorough materialist viewpoint. When dealing with questions about nature, the early materialists had a strong materialist viewpoint, but when dealing with social issues, they slipped into an idealist viewpoint. And we all know idealism is bad. And then it says, in other words, while proper materialism must contain a degree of relativistic thinking sufficient to challenge assumptions and re-examine perceived truth periodically, materialists must not fall into complete relativism, like Hume and Kant, lest they fall into idealist positions. And then Lenin recognized the development of Marx and Engels as modern materialism, which is immeasurably richer in content and incomparably more consistent than all preceding forms of materialism, in large part because Marx and Engels were able to apply materialism properly to social sciences by taking the, quote, direct materialist road against idealism. And then a quote built upon Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' thought. Lenin says, "Matter is a philosophical category denoting objective reality which is given to man and his sensations, and which is copied, photographed, or reflected by our sensations, while existing independently of them." And then Lenin not only confirmed the primary existence of matter and the secondary existence of consciousness, but he also affirmed that humans have the ability to perceive of our sensations. In other words, sense perceptions. And then motion is the mode of existence of matter. Space and time are the forms of existence of matter. This is under mode and forms of existence of matter. Mode refers to the way or manner in which something occurs or exists. So mode of existence of matter refers to how matter exists in our universe. Form comes from the category pair of content and form. So form of existence of matter refers to the ways in which we perceive the existence of matter in our universe. And then Engels said, motion embodies, quote, all the changes and processes happening in the universe. Matter is always associated with motion, and matter can only express its existence through motion. In dialectical materialist philosophy, motion is also known as change, and it refers to the changes which occur as a result of the mutual impacts which occur in or between subjects through the negation of contradictions. Motion is a constant attribute of all things, phenomena, and ideas. And Engels defined motion as the mode of matter, the way or manner in which matter exists. And matter exists objectively. Therefore, motion can also exist objectively. The motion of matter is self-motion. It is important to note that matter is in the philosophical sense, as used in dialectical materialist philosophy, includes all that is objective, external, to individual human consciousness. And then Engels said, motion can neither be created or destroyed. Therefore, motion can only change form or transfer from one object to another. In other words, every body of matter is in motion relative to other bodies of matter, and thus, matter is inseparable from motion. Motion results from the interaction of bodies of matter. The motion of matter can be described as self-motion. And then Engels further explains it and says the indestructibility of motion cannot be merely quantitative. It must also be conceived qualitatively. And qualitatively and quantitative and qualitative are very important for us to learn as we go along if you haven't learned the difference yet. And matter whose purely mechanical change of place includes indeed the possibility under favorable conditions of being transformed into heat, electricity, chemical action, or life, but which is not capable of producing these conditions from out of itself. Such matter has forfeited motion. Motion has lost the capacity of being transformed into the various forms appropriate to it, may indeed still have dynamesis, but no longer energia, and so has become partially destroyed. Both, however, are unthinkable. So, motion can change forms and can transfer from one material body to another, but it can never be created externally from matter. And neither motion nor matter can be created or destroyed in our universe. Thus, matter exists in a state of quote-unquote self-motion. Motion can never externally be created nor externally applied to matter. And then we got mechanical motion, which is changes in position of objects in space. Physical motion, movements of molecules, electrons, fundamental particles, thermal process electricity. Chemical motion, changes of organic and inorganic substances in combination and separation processes. Biological motion, changes of living objects or genetic structure. And social motion, changes in economy, politics, culture, and social life. The basic forms of motion each affect different forms of matter, but these forms of motion do not exist independently from each other. They actually have strong relationships with each other, in which the more advanced forms of motion develop from lower forms of motion. The more advanced forms of motion also internally include lower forms of motion. Every object exists with many forms of motion, but any given object is defined by its most advanced form of motion. And then Engels said the basic forms of motion differ from one another, but they are also unified with each other into one continuous system of motion. And this one's a big one. Dialectical materialism affirmed that motion was the mode of existence, the natural attribute of matter. It also confirmed that motion is absolute and eternal. This does not mean that dialectical materialism denies that things can become frozen. However, according to the dialectical materialist viewpoint, freezing is a special form of motion. It is motion in equilibrium, and freezing is relative and temporary. Motion in equilibrium is motion that has not changed the positions, forms, and/or structure of things. And freezing is a relative phenomenon because freezing only occurs in some forms of motion and in some specific relations. It does not occur in all forms of motion and all kinds of relations. Freezing is a temporary phenomenon because freezing only exists for a limited period of time. It cannot last forever. Every form of matter exists in a specific position with specific space particularity in special relation with other forms of matter. These positional relations exist in what we call space, and space is defined by positional relations of matter. On the other hand, the existence of matter is also expressed in the speed of change and the order in which changes occur. These changes occur in what we call time. As Engels wrote, for the basic forms of all existence are space and time, and a being outside of time is as absurd as an existence outside space. Matter, space, and time are not separable. There is no matter that exists outside of space and time. There is also no space and time that exists outside of matter's motions. Space and time, as forms of existence of matter, exist objectively and are defined by matter. Space, which is important, has three dimensions: height, width, length. But time has one direction, from the past to the future. And then the material unity of the world. Dialectical materialism affirms that the nature of the world is matter, and the world is unified in its material properties. The most important thing to understand is that every object and phenomenon in the universe arises as matter. All material objects and phenomenon are dynamically linked to one another in an infinite chain of causes and effects and changes and transformations, all governed by the material laws of our reality. This understanding is the material foundation of dialectical materialism. And then we went into the source of consciousness. Consciousness arises from nature and from social activities and relations. Natural refers to the material world. Social activities and relations also contribute to the development of consciousness. The social process of labor and language were also prerequisites for the development of conscious activity in human beings. And then we went into natural sources of consciousness. There are many factors that form the natural sources of consciousness, but the two most basic factors are human brains and the relationship between humans and the objective world, which makes possible creative and dynamic reflection. And consciousness is the function and the result of the neurophysiological activities of human brains. Consciousness exists as a dynamic set of relationships between the external material world, human sense perception, and the functions of the human brain. Reflection is the recreation of the features of one form of matter in a different form of matter, which occurs when they mutually impact each other through interaction. Reflection is a characteristic of all forms of matter. There are many forms and levels of reflection, such as physical and chemical reflection, biological reflection, mental reflection, creative and dynamic reflection, etc. Change is driven by mutual impacts between or within things, phenomena, and/or ideas. Anytime two such subjects impact one another, traces of some form or another are left on both interacting subjects. The characteristic of change is called reflection. And then you talked about how capitalism came out of feudalism and how we still have characteristics of feudalism in our capitalism. I thought that was important. Dialectical materialist scientists have developed a theory on the development of evolution of forms of reflection, positing that forms of reflection have become increasingly complex as organic processes and life have evolved and grown more complex over time. Physical and chemical reflection is the simplest form of reflection, dealing with the ways in which inorganic matter is reflected in human consciousness. Physical and chemical reflection is the reflection of mechanical, physical, and chemical changes and reactions of inorganic matter. Physical and chemical reactions are passive. When two objects interact with each other physically or chemically, they do not do so consciously. As dialectical materialists, we must strive to develop our understanding of the reflection of both physical and chemical changes and relations so that our conceptions reflect the material world as accurately as possible. And then biological reflection is a higher, more complex form of reflection. It deals with reflection of organic material in the natural world. Our conscious reflections of the natural world have also become more complex. Biological reflection is expressed through excitation, induction, and reflexes. Excitation is the reaction of simple plant and animal life forms, which occurs when they change position or structure as a direct result of physical changes to their habitat. Induction is the reaction of animals with simple nerve systems, which can sense or feel their environments. Induction occurs through unconditioned reflex mechanisms. Unconditioned reflexes are characterized by permanent connections between sensory perceptions and reactions. Mental reflections are reactions which occur in animals with central nervous systems. Conditioned reflexes are reactions which are learned by organisms. That we went over Pavlov and his dogs. And that's a conditioned response. Dynamic and creative reflection is the most advanced form of reflection. It only occurs in matter that has the highest structural levels, such as the human brain. This dynamic and creative reflection is called consciousness. Thus, all forms of matter share the characteristic of being able to be reflected in the human mind. And then Marx and Engels argued that consciousness arose from the life processes of human beings. Life processes are processes of motion and change which occur within organisms to sustain life. And these processes have a dialectical relationship with consciousness. The processes of life, therefore, reflect consciousness, just as consciousness reflects human life processes. And then Marx said, life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. Life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. In the first method of approach, the starting point is consciousness, taken as the living individual. In the second method, which conforms to real life, it is the real living individuals themselves, and consciousness is considered solely as their consciousness. And then Marx said we should focus on the material process and conditions of society if we intend to change society, because idealist speculation, conjecture, critique, and thought alone at the individual level will never be capable of effecting revolutionary change in our material world. Life gives rise to the brain. Nature is reflected in the human brain. And Lenin further defined the relationship between matter and consciousness through reflection. And he did a lot of that. I think that's where we're at. Yeah, that's where we're at. That's the end.
Yeah.
All right. What's up, Dooley? What did you want to add?
I just wanted to add that I'm glad what I brought up yesterday was also brought up in this reading, because the thing with mechanical materialism and idealism is that they both function off of ignoring a part of reality. For the idealist, it's ignoring that other people exist, or the world exists around you, whether it be other people or other beings in general, or like the buildings you stand in front of, or your environment. Whereas mechanical materialism denies that you yourself exist, that you exist in any other way than as a reaction, and how that logic eventually goes back into idealism, because they, in some form or function, do acknowledge that they themselves exist, like the person themselves exists, but they still are within the logic of separating self from the world. And I'm just glad that that was brought up. Also, a proof, or not proof, but like something I find interesting is that the theory of reflection sounds very similar to Newton's third law. With each action, there will be an equal but opposite reaction, and that I found interesting. Also, I also like how it's explained that that within dialectical materialism, it's explained that the ideal and the material are interdependent, with the material always coming first.
Yes.
Which I feel like a lot of people are trying to use the language of dialectical materialism, while in the functions of what they're saying, they're just doing mechanical materialism. And so I think it's very important to mention that it's interdependent, not interdependent, but that too, but interdetermined. They determine each other, with material taking the head of it. And that's basically all I had to say.
All right. That sounds good. I think we've gotten a little bit more. We're going to learn a little bit more as we move on and stuff like that. We're going to get into qualitative. They're going to tell you the difference of those things. So we're going to get more. It's going to get got more pictures to go and everything like that. But yeah, it's good to understand the different modes of like motions, and the different modes of time and space, and the modes of organic matter, inorganic matter, and how its relations and stuff like that is very good today. Other than that, does anybody else anything lastly to say before I close out? All right, then. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time, around 6:30 Central Time. We'll continue the reading then. I appreciate everybody for interacting and saying stuff. I appreciate that. All right.
Yay.
Talk to you all later.